Once upon a time, there lived a very wealthy woman who gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Her name was Frida, and she never touched her baby from the day that she was born. Unlike other mothers who yearned to hold their baby in their arms, Frida treated her own like a plague. The nurses all wondered why she did what she did. Some even gave her reasons why holding her baby would be beneficial in her healing. But Frida did not listen to what anyone had to say. She had a nanny who she paid hugely to care for the child. She provided everything that the baby would ever need, but stayed away as she watched her baby from a distance, monitoring everything that the nanny did. Many found this behavior strange, and soon gossips began to fly. Some believed that her refusal to nurse her child was tied to diabolical reasons, whilst others doubted the fact that she was the child's mother. They believed the child was adopted and that Frida regretted ever adopting her. Despite this, Frida remained silent as her nanny Salma took on the responsibility of caring for her child. Months passed and Frida had still not touched her child. Her actions were now growing more suspicious as no one even knew who the child's father was. Several speculations were made, but no one could say for sure that they knew who the true father was. Frida was such a private woman, and this made it difficult for anyone to know what was really going on. Even the nanny Selma was oblivious as to why Frida refused to touch her daughter. However, she dared not ask, as she feared what would happen if she ever did. Her entire family relied on the money that she received from working with Frida, and Salma could not risk losing her job over what she believed was not her business. However, things soon changed when she received a call from an unknown number. The call came late one evening while Salma was rocking the baby to sleep. At first, she hesitated to answer, but curiosity got the better part of her. So, she picked the call and asked who it was. "Hello?" A deep, calm voice responded.
If you can find out why Frida refuses to touch her baby, you'll receive 5 million in cash. No questions asked.
The line went dead as the nanny sat up and stared at her phone screen, her heart pounding. She stared at the phone in her hand, wondering if it was a dream. 5 million? Her hands began to shake. The money could change her life and that of her entire family. She could send her siblings to school with it, build her mother a house, and even start up her own business. As she sat there thinking, her Madame Frida walked past the baby's room to her study. Her study was next to the baby's nursery, and oftentimes the nanny could hear her sob gently as she worked. She knew deep within herself that there was something broken about her Madame Frida, something hidden, and though Salma never said a word, she had always sensed it. Still, 5 million was a lot of money. She stayed awake all night, thinking about the offer as she finally decided to jump at it. She called the number and agreed to the request, promising to find out why her madam had refused to touch her baby. So the next morning, her mission began. She watched Frida closely and asked casual questions, hoping to piece together a story that would make sense. But Frida gave nothing away. Salma became so frustrated. She thought of what to do and came up with a plan which she believed would work. She stayed up all night, painting a huge picture of Frida holding her baby in her arms. Salma believed that doing so would trigger some kind of reaction that she believed would give her a clue as to what was happening. She hung the picture on the hallway leading to Frida's room as she waited patiently to get her reaction. Hours later, Frida walked out of her room and saw the picture. She was so agitated that she picked it from the wall and smashed it on the ground. "Who hung this rubbish on my wall?" Frida yelled out angrily as Salma walked out to meet her with the baby in her arms. "I didn't mean any harm, ma. I thought you would like it," she said to Frida, who warned her sternly to never pull such a stunt again. Salma apologized repeatedly, her heart racing in her chest, but inside she smiled. Frida's reaction had confirmed something to her, that there was indeed a wound, buried deep, one that the mere sight of a painting could rip open. As the days went by, Salma changed her strategy. She became more affectionate with the baby in Frida's presence, rocking the child in the open lounge, singing lullabies loud enough for Frida to hear. Sometimes, she even spoke to the baby to the hearing of Frida, reassuring the baby that her mama loves her, even if she can't say it. One evening, she said to the baby that she looked so much like her mother Frida, and Frida, who was sitting on the sofa, stared angrily at them but said nothing. She simply walked out on them and retired to her room, where she cried her eyes out for hours. Salma, however, knew that she was getting close. For all these months, she had never seen Frida this angry. However, she decided to take her plan a step further. Salma decided to do the unthinkable. She cooked up a plan, which she believed would make Frida carry her baby for the very first time. Salma knew that she had to be strategic if she ever wanted her plan to work. She let out a very loud scream that startled Frida in her bedroom. Frida rushed out to check what had happened. She arrived at the scene and met her nanny Salma, who was collapsed on the floor. The baby, too, was lying down on the floor, next to her, crying at the top of her voice. For a split second, Salma believed that Frida would break through whatever wall that she had built around her heart. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped over the baby like she wasn't there and rushed to the living room to grab her phone. She called on her doctor, who rushed to her house to see what was happening. Salma, seeing that her plan had failed, remained still on the ground, pretending to be unconscious as the doctor examined her. Just a fainting spell, Dr. Lanre said softly, helping Salma to sit up as she blinked slowly and played along. She must have been overwhelmed and would need a bit of rest. Frida said nothing. She stood by the door, her arms folded tightly across her chest as she stared at the doctor, who was now examining the baby, who continued to wail at the top of her voice. She seems to be fine, the doctor said as he tried to hand the baby over to Frida, who crossed her arms and smiled at him. I just need Salma to be alright. Please give her whatever she needs, she said to the doctor, who stood there stunned at her reaction. She didn't even spare the child a glance as she walked off to her room. Salma, on seeing all that happened, rushed to the doctor to carry the baby. She could not believe all that had just happened. Frida didn't even blink at the sight of her baby in distress. No hint of worry, no twitch of instinct, no maternal reflex. Salma was confused and angry. She returned to the baby's nursery, convinced that Frida had no atom of care for her child. Salma could not understand what the innocent child would have done to warrant this level of hatred from her own mother. Days passed, and Salma had still not figured out what was happening. She was now running out of time and didn't know what to do. One evening, as she was tidying up the baby's laundry, the doorbell rang and Salma rushed to check who it was. She saw an elderly man who asked to see Frida. Salma asked to know who he was, and the elderly man revealed that he was Frida's husband. Salma froze in shock as she tried to understand what she was hearing. She ushered him into the house and quickly called on Frida, who was already on her way back from work. A few minutes later, Frida arrived at home and met the man, who gave her a reassuring smile. "What are you doing here?" she asked the man, who told her that they needed to talk. "I have nothing to say to you. Get out of my house now," Frida said angrily, as the man informed her that they had to do something about their situation. "We can't keep living like this," he said to Frida, who pushed him out of her house and shut the door. Salma could not help but notice the tension in the house. She rushed out through the back door and met the man, who pleaded with her to talk to her madam. Salma promised to talk to Frida if the man told her the truth about what was happening. "I'll tell you everything, but we can't talk here. Call me," he said to Salma as he handed her his phone number and walked away. Salma could not contain her joy. She waited till when Frida had gone to bed and called the man's number. The old man picked up after several rings. Salma introduced herself to him, and the old man began to tell her things that she could not believe.
Frida wasn't always like this,
the man began, his voice heavy with regret.
She was once full of life, full of dreams, but everything changed the day she touched her first child and watched him die in her arms.
Salma gripped the phone tightly, her chest tightening as she asked what he meant. The man sighed deeply and continued to speak.
Frida was my wife's niece, who I ended up marrying after my wife failed to give me children for almost 25 years. I was married to her auntie, a good woman who stayed by my side for over 25 years, but we couldn't have children. So, when Frida's mother died, her auntie pushed for Frida to come live with us. I was against it at first, but my wife convinced me, saying that Frida's presence in our home would open doors of fruitfulness to us. So I agreed, and Frida moved into our home. The first few years were fine until Frida began to grow into an extremely beautiful woman who caught my attention. I got her pregnant, and when my wife found out, she lost her mind. I drove her away like she meant nothing. She stood at the door with tears in her eyes and cursed Frida. She said, "You will never carry what you steal, because your hands will bring death to your own." Then she walked to the river that evening and drowned herself. Everyone forgot about the curse until Frida gave birth to our son months later. The moment she touched him, he stopped breathing, and the doctors called it sudden infant death. Then, months later, it happened again with our second child and the third. All of them died in her arms. Nothing, absolutely nothing was wrong with them. They just died immediately she held them, and people began to call her cursed. So, Frida ran away, and no one ever heard from her again.
Salma's heart shattered into a million pieces. She asked the man if he was the father of her little baby, and the man revealed to her that he wasn't.
I'm even shocked that she still decided to have a child after all that had happened,
he said to Salma, who wondered who the father of the child could be. She thanked the man for narrating the entire story to her, promising to talk to Frida on his behalf. Salma, however, knew better than to do so. All she wanted was information on why Frida never touched her child and who the child's father was. She was not ready to be entangled in unfinished emotions as well as old wounds. Salma hung up the phone and began to think. The entire story was so shocking, and Salma was so grateful that her plan of the other day failed. Frida would have held her child and lost her, and Salma could not help but worry. Now, she understood why Frida refused to touch her child, not out of hatred, but out of a duty to protect her. She picked up her phone and tried to dial the number of the woman who had promised her 5 million, but something within her spirit stopped her. She decided to hold off for a little while she figures out who the child's father could be. One fateful morning, while Salma was spoon-feeding the baby mashed fruit in the kitchen, her phone rang. It was her younger sister Zainab.
Salma,
Zainab said frantically.
You need to come to the house right now. It's urgent.
Salma's heart dropped. What happened? Is Mama okay?
I can't explain on the phone. Just come, please.
The line went dead. Salma did not wait. She wrapped the baby carefully in a shawl, grabbed her bag and left the house without informing Frida. Whatever the emergency was, she would rather explain later than delay. She arrived at her mother's house with her heart pounding in her chest and the baby asleep in her arms. As she stepped through the gate, her eyes locked with someone who she never expected to see. Her Madame Frida. Frida froze, stunned. Her eyes dropped to the child in Salma's arms. What are you doing here? Frida asked, her voice stiff and confused. I got a call from my sister. Salma stammered. She said to come urgently. I didn't know you were here. At that moment, her sister Zainab emerged from the house and her face lit up in shock when she saw them together. You work for her? Zainab said, pointing at Frida. Salma nodded slowly, revealing that Frida was her madam. Why do you ask? Salma asked her sister Zainab, who drew her to the side to reveal that her brother got Frida pregnant almost 2 years ago. On that fateful day, Frida was drunk, and their brother Mulilo, who was also drunk in the club, met her crying in her car alone. He offered to keep her company, listening to all her rants as she talked about the loss that she had just suffered. One thing led to another, and the two found themselves in a hotel. They spent the night together, and by morning, Frida woke up to find herself alone in the room. She had no name or number to reach Mulilo. All she could remember was the scar that he had on his wrist, which they talked about on that night. This morning, whilst Frida was buying groceries in the supermarket, she came across Mulilo and trailed him to his mother's house, revealing that Mulilo was the father of their child. Salma stood frozen, her arms tightening around the baby. She turned slowly to look at Frida, who now stood a few feet away, her expression unreadable and cold. The walls around Salma's mind began to crumble as the weight of the truth settled. The baby in her arms, the one who she had fed, bathed and rocked to sleep for months, was her brother's child, her own very niece. Salma walked up to Frida, who stood there shocked to realize that her daughter was her nanny's niece. Salma pleaded with Frida to forgive her brother, but Frida smiled and said that whatever happened that night was consensual. I agreed to it, and so did your brother. I was drunk, broken and desperate for someone to listen to me. Your brother listened. He didn't force me into anything. All he did wrong was leaving me alone that morning with no name or clue on how to find him. I'm not here to destroy your family, Frida said softly. I didn't even plan to come here, but when I saw him again today, I just needed to inform him that he had a child. Mulilo, who had been standing in the corner shocked, walked up to them to see his daughter for the very first time. His hands trembled as he reached out to lift the baby from his sister's arms, but just as he tried to secure her, the baby slipped from his arms and began to fall. Frida quickly lunged forward and caught the baby by the leg, pulling her safely into her arms. This was the first time that Frida was ever touching her own daughter. She began to cry, believing that the baby would soon die, just like the other babies that she had given birth to. But nothing seemed to happen. She held her breath, waiting 1 second, 2 seconds, and even 3. But the child in her arms blinked up at her with wide, curious eyes, alive, unarmed, and perfectly fine. Frida stood there frozen, her legs buckled, as she dropped to her knees, still holding her baby close. Tears poured down her face as she cradled the child tighter, trembling all over. The fear, the grief, the guilt she had buried for years came crashing to the surface like a flood. She's alive, she whispered in disbelief, realizing that her baby did not die. Salma and Zainab stood frozen. Even Mulilo couldn't move. The moment felt sacred as everyone stood there in shock. I can't believe she's still alive. They said I'm cursed, Frida said repeatedly as Salma approached. Salma moved closer and whispered to Frida that she was never cursed. Frida's lips parted as she asked Salma how she knew this. Salma took a deep breath and began to speak. I need to tell you something, Frida. Something I found out this morning. Frida's expression changed, her arms tightening protectively around her child. He told me that your aunt cursed you before drowning herself, but I've spoken to someone else, a man who used to work closely with your husband. He came to the house this morning, claiming that he had been looking for you for years. Salma went on to reveal to Frida that her aunt never cursed her. She never drowned herself as she was killed. It was her husband who killed her after using her womb for money rituals. He then married you and began to use your own children for his rituals. That's when your children started dying. It wasn't a curse. He used them, Frida, and made you and everyone believe that you were cursed. He made it look like it was your touch that killed them. He told everyone lies and even paid people to spread the story of the curse. Frida looked down at her baby with tears in her eyes. She could not believe that for all these months, she denied herself happiness because of a lie that she lived for years. He lied to me, she whispered. He stole my babies and my peace, she said as Salma nodded gently. But not this one. Not anymore, Frida, she said as she gave Frida a tight hug. That very night, Frida could not sleep. She called a few of her contacts, and by morning, her auntie's husband was arrested. Witnesses who had once vanished were now stepping forward to build a case against him, and soon he was sentenced for all the atrocities that he committed. Weeks later, Salma received a call from the unknown caller who offered her 5 million for the truth. Salma picked up. A silky female voice spoke on the other end of the phone, asking if she had gotten the information. Salma's face turned cold. "You know," she said slowly, "for a long time, I thought 5 million was a lot of money, but I've come to learn that some things are priceless. Don't ever call this number again." Salma said angrily as she hung up the phone. What she did not know was that the unknown caller was a bitter businesswoman who had been competing with Frida for a multi-million contract. She believed that if she could dig up a scandal from Frida's past, she'd gain the upper hand in securing the contract. Salma was so grateful that she didn't divulge the information to the caller earlier. She would have ruined the life of her niece's mother without even knowing it. Frida, on the other hand, learned the hard way never to take that which belonged to another. She regretted all she did to her aunt and wished that she could turn back the hands of time to undo all the terrible things that she did. The lessons to be learned from this story is that pain wears many faces, and not every silence means guilt. Sometimes, the very people we blame are the ones fighting unseen battles. Frida taught us that not all mothers who keep their distance are cold. Some are just broken by lies, too heavy to carry. Salma showed us that no amount of money is worth trading someone's truth, and above all, this story reminds us that evil always wears a mask, but truth, no matter how buried, will always find its voice. I hope you enjoyed the story.